Hey everyone, welcome back to The Wealth of Self, and thank you for tuning in for episode number 3. In the studio today, we're joined by Josh Tugjnyam, who I'm honored to call a good friend and somebody I look up to in a lot of different ways. Our paths crossed by complete coincidence when we were paired up on a wedding film assignment, and since that time, I've become more and more intrigued by Josh's story. He grew up in Mongolia and as a young boy moved to Moscow, Russia, where he faced a variety of challenges. He and his family later moved to the United States where he completed his college education. But not only that, this guy's a black belt in Jiu Jitsu, and he's an accomplished sommelier in some of the finest restaurants and establishments in Washington, D.C., including some Michelin stars. I'm very excited to share his origin story with you, who he is as a person, and hear about what Josh believes has truly made him wealthy. He has an abundance of lessons and many goals that he is still working toward. So thanks for tuning in on this episode of The Wealth of Self. Hey everybody, I wanted to quickly interject before we kick this episode off and just say thank you. First and foremost, thank you for your viewership. Thank you if you are a subscriber, somebody who is engaging with this content in the comment section. All of that stuff is invaluable. You don't realize how much it helps, because at the root of this effort is to get people's stories out in front of a larger audience, and all of you are playing a part in that. When it comes to The Wealth of Self, this is a production effort. There is research, communication involved. There's obviously a lot of camera and lighting and audio and all of that stuff that goes into this. So if you are interested in supporting in another way beyond your viewership or beyond your engagement with the content, we also have a Patreon support page, which you can find right down in the description of this video. You can go over there and become a one-time supporter, a monthly supporter. You can kind of pick and choose how you want to do that. But I have to say that those contributors and those contributions in general are immensely helpful. I can't even put it into words what it means to have that level of artistic freedom to pursue these stories in a really meaningful way. In addition to the Patreon page, we also have a kit.co, which is basically like an affiliate link page where you can find all of my production company's equipment. That's audio, camera, lenses, anything else that we're utilizing to bring these stories together. If you're in the world of video production or photography, you can go over there and check that out. And if you click through one of those links, there's a very small commission that comes back to me. It doesn't affect the price at which you purchase any of that, whether it's through B&H, Amazon, Adorama, whatever it may be, but a small percentage of that kicks back to help support these creative efforts and others that I'm pursuing in my personal and professional life. Now, without further ado, let's kick this episode off. Thank you for joining The Wealth of Self. Welcome back from the intro. Thanks for tuning in to watch The Wealth of Self. I'm here with a good friend, somebody who I've really enjoyed getting to know, and it was by total coincidence that we were paired up. This is Josh Tugjnyam, and I've had the chance to work with Josh in a number of professional settings, but we're going to dive in on his origin story, some of the developmental tools he's used over the course of his life, both abroad and here, to grow into the awesome dude that he is today. So I'm excited for everybody to meet my guy, Josh. What's up, man?
Thank you for the introduction. It is just my honor to be here. It is a privilege. I am so grateful and thankful to be here, share this moment with you. Yeah. And I am happy that it has evolved into this moment for us to be able to have a chat. And I'm happy that you want to hear my story, and that's incredible for me. And it is an honor and privilege, and I don't take that for granted.
Well, I appreciate those kind words, because I think you have always stood out to someone who has had an incredibly unique story to me. And having had the opportunity to travel and do a little bit of sightseeing around the world, I've always really appreciated people who have also come from different places. And now they might find themselves in a place that's totally different than where they started. And I think that's kind of like the epitome of your story. I mean, when you first, and it wasn't until really recently when we started to discuss the deeper details of who you are, but it's just like fascinating, man, because so many folks, they don't have that opportunity to see the world through that lens. And you've been able to see the world through a lot of different lenses. And I think that's really special. And not only that, but you've implemented some tools into your life that I think a lot of people could benefit from, specifically Jiu Jitsu, which we'll get into more. But I feel like you've been able to strike a balance with who you are and who you want to become. And a lot of people could benefit from that.
Nice.
So, yeah.
I mean, that's incredible for me to hear that, at least from you.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're in the process or when it's yourself in the journey, sometimes you don't really see it.
Yeah, it's
you know,
hard.
it's really hard to see that kind of a bigger picture. And even just now, how you said it, for me, it's like, man, giving me goosebumps. You know, it's like, wow. It's like, I can't believe what I've been through. And it's like, in the moment when you're going through such things or like those kind of journeys, life-changing events,
Yeah.
sometimes you don't realize it. And I just feel so fortunate to be able to look back and at least just, hopefully my journey, how I got here to this day, you know, where I grew up or how I'm able to see different parts of life in the world. I mean, I feel fortunate. I'm thankful for my parents for making that happen.
Oh, yeah.
Because one thing I do remember vividly for me is that when I first visited another country,
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I just thought my world was what I could see.
Yeah.
You know, and then, as far as my eye could see, that's how big of a world, like in my mind, in my head, and to see that there was so much more beyond my imagination, it was just mind-boggling.
Yeah,
you
and
know,
that's a lot of people's vision. And that's nothing against people at all. You know, we all have our lives, and I think we have, like we talked about before the cast even started, we have our families. Those people are in places. So, like, our family almost becomes associated with a place in some instances. And it's not until it happens to you and until you go outside of that comfort zone or go outside of your city or your state or your country where you're like, oh, damn, you know, there's a lot out here, man. And it just starts, I think if you're open to it and you have an open mind, there's a really deep appreciation for those differences and those similarities that can accompany that. And so, and the other thing that's unique about, I think, your story is that in some instances, you chose to push those comfort zones. But in other instances, that decision was kind of made for you. When you talk about moving from Mongolia to Russia, or you talk about maybe coming over here to the United States, like those were decisions, I think, that from what I understand, it was sort of a family decision in a lot of ways. So you were a part of the decision, but you know, you were kind of with a group of people who were making that decision collectively.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is very true because those choices were essentially part of the fate or destiny, whatever you may call it, or your path that you're walking. Those are meant to be happen, you know, and to be able to adapt when those changes happen and not, you know, not freak out, for example, or lose your cool and you start acting out, you know, and so many kids do that. And I see that a lot because they unhappy with certain things or uncertainty brings them that kind of an fear or, you know, like acting out, whatever it may. I mean, we all, even as adults, you see that happen all the time, you know, and the world just become a crazy place for a couple of years. But for me, what was always important, even those changes were happening, and I now look back and it's becoming even more clear, is that there was always this balance that I was seeking. You know, there's something that I wanted to find, that peace by seeking that kind of a balance, to have, you know, good mindset, for example,
Yeah.
and you have positive mindset, and be a joy to other people around you because they're the closest people to you. And I think you see that more when you're facing more of those difficult situations or new situations or uncertain situations. And that's when I think you really can see who you truly are when you're in those moments,
when you're
right?
pushed. Yeah.
When you're pushed, and and especially like losing someone, or a new job, you get fired from a job, or bad things happen to you, and you just like can't catch a break.
Yeah.
You know, and it happens, and that is life.
Yeah.
But in your heart, if you seek that peace and balance, I think it will bring you more joy, and it will bring joy more to the people that are meaningful to you.
Yeah.
And I really sincerely and truly believe that.
Yeah.
And I feel so fortunate that it has come, my travels and my growth, and the difficulties I faced. Now I learned from them to become who I am, or made me who I am.
Yeah.
I'm still becoming.
Yeah.
I'm still growing.
You're still learning, right? You're still
Exactly.
learning. I think you hit the nail on the head, though. It's like all of those things have led you to where you are now, and only in the present moment can you really start to look back and appreciate that journey as it developed. And for the viewers now, I want to get into some of the meat of this, because I think you've obviously gone through a lot. You've gone through many experiences that have shaped who you are now, but there are really fascinating details to all those pieces of your past. And I want to dive into some of that with you. And I want to go back to the origin, talking about where you were born, where you grew up. Because for a lot of listeners, especially people who would be based here in the United States, it'd be like, I've never heard a story like that before. So tell me about your origin. Where were you born? Yeah.
Man, I'm excited to share. That is a great way to start off. I agree. So I was born in Mongolia. A lot of people think it's Malaysia, but it is Mongolia.
A little different climate.
Completely different climate. Mongolia, it is, it's almost landlocked, but it is a very big country with a rich history. And it's quite unique. It's one of those places where the natural elements of the world is still intact.
Yeah.
Where in the world now, everything, you see it on the news, you see it, man, you feel it outside when it's like, man, I can't believe how cold it is, or there's a crazy blizzard.
Or even air conditioned, stuff like that.
So to come from a country where we're so connected to the earth, connected to just our surroundings and environment, and living off that, I think those are kind of the values that I had when I was growing up was important to me. Having that kind of respect for the nature and just for people around you, and not, everything. So Mongolia is that part of who I am has always been with me. Of course, there's parts of you that change because once you see certain things, or once you experience certain things, and now you have a newer perspective or newer understanding of life, or relationships, whatever it may be, right? So for me, growing up in a country that had those values, I think I can see now that I can share that with my kids, or share with my students, for example, or people who I'm training with even. So
do you have some family back there? I mean, I know you've talked about going back on a couple of occasions. Have you experienced changes in the country? Obviously, you talk about it being a very natural environment, very connected to the earth. I mean, is that pretty much the same way now, or have other elements of like capitalism and modernization, have those crept in and changed that view of Mongolia for you?
I would definitely say that Mongolia has changed, and just like anything in the world, it definitely has changed. But my perception of a young boy growing up in Mongolia is still pretty pure. I think it has that,
like Wonderland.
Yeah, exactly. Peter Pan. But it is there. I think it might be a fantasy, but you can't deny the fact that the world is changing.
Oh no.
And I'm sure the city's there. Since my last visit, which was in 2015, perhaps.
It's been a while then.
It has been quite some time. I was planning to go in 2020. 2019, and it got delayed into 2020. But that's just life. But I know that for a fact a lot has changed over there. It's perhaps not the world that I saw with boyish lens or boyish eyes with fantasy and eagerness and imaginations. But there are a lot of parts of the country that are still fight back into reserving or preserving the nature how it was like 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. So it's incredible to see that, because the government does a lot of work there to preserve that.
That's good.
And for me, I know that that is important part of life to connect to, or Mongolia is.
Yeah.
Brings me right back to the roots, the origins of who I am and what I value and what's important on the truly fundamental levels. Right. But to specify more about myself or where I'm from.
Like near a major city?
Yes. So I was born in the capital of Mongolia, which is Ulaanbaatar. I believe now there's probably like 3 to 4 million people that live there.
Okay.
So it is growing. Yeah, the cities are growing. But what I do miss, or what I do remember most, is being out in the countryside and seeing the herds. And, it's incredible to see, like, people just living their life, just, man, no insurance, no taxes, nothing.
Kind of nomadically, right?
Nomadic lifestyle. You're really living off the nature itself, and you're living day by day and really enjoying each moment, however tough it may be. So for me, I have that in my heart, and it's safe that, it's always
never going to touch that.
Oh, I hope not. No way. No way.
Well, that movement, I mean, you talk about that, and I think that's absolutely true. Even when I think about my childhood, I think about growing up and going down to my aunt's farm and, riding the four-wheeler down there, or, catching crawdads in the creek. Obviously a very different experience than being in Mongolia, right?
Yes.
But there's some almost mystical element to that time of my life. Like you said, looking through that period of time through boyish eyes, right? It was like, it was an adventure. I was outside. I was in the woods. I was catching lizards. I was doing everything I could to just be outside, be outdoors. And that's a part of me. It will be a part of me forever. And it kind of, in a way, it sort of informed my love of the outdoors and just being in the outdoors. And so you were in Mongolia up until what age? Because at a certain point, there was a shift out of Mongolia, and that's where I'd like to sort of go, because you talked about when we were actually going up to produce the video in Ohio, you gave me the whole rundown about your dad's shifting of job that sort of made that movement possible. So I'd like to talk about where in Mongolia, at what age were you starting to make that shift?
So my family, we decided my parents told us we were moving to Moscow.
You didn't really have a say in this, right?
I really didn't have a say. And they said, we're moving back.
This is happening.
Yeah, bring your clothes.
Yeah.
Right? You're like, okay.
Back a bag.
Where are we going?
Yeah.
Moscow. I'm like, okay, Moscow.
How old were you at that time?
So I was 10 years old.
Okay.
Even then, now looking back, I still thinking, I was like, the world is just what I can see and what's in front of me. And and that's what it is. Sometimes boy's a boy, But however, as soon as we moved to Russia, luckily to my dad's new job, it was in the airline business. So he got stationed in Moscow.
Yeah.
So we moved in the summer of 1998.
Okay, 98.
And so I was about to turn 11. So I was 10, turning 11. And
you're in that fourth grade, fifth grade
yes,
range.
Exactly.
So, you were kind of leaving some friends behind, I'm sure, at that
I
point,
was. I was leaving my first love behind.
Oh,
it was so sad. Heartbroken. I remember it was like, because I sat next to her for 3 years
in class.
In class, you're like sit next to each other. You sit in the same classrooms, whatever.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Barely talk, but
you're just always shy about it,
She moved her hair.
It's a sign. It's a sign.
No, well, luckily it wasn't all in my head. Luckily, I found out that she did feel mutual. Okay. So it was a very like I would say pure love at that
Yeah,
moment,
right.
you know,
Yeah,
one of the
as a
first
little kid,
exactly. So I mean, I'm happy for that, but I remember at that moment, and you didn't have cell phone, you didn't
Of
have like
course, yeah.
iPads and FaceTime. You know, I had to like find out the code how you can dial a number. So,
Wow.
but and also international calling costs a
Yeah.
lot of
Oh, it's not
money.
cheap.
Oh,
And not then, at least.
and then I got caught by my parents when they're like looking at the bill because they print this fax of all
going
the
on?
what is this number? Oh my God. And I was like, but my parents were very supportive in that nature too because they knew the family of that little girl at that
Yeah.
time. And then my dad working in the airport, luckily we met up one day like on the border, you know, like
That's cool.
it was like a movie scene in a
Oh
way.
my
I couldn't
gosh.
believe it. I had like a little toy, you know, but you can cross this little yellow line, the imaginary, almost imaginary
Yeah.
border, right?
Right.
Or wall.
Yeah.
And I remember that, and just leaving behind that little boyish world, right?
Yeah.
The fantasy of you have into completely new country.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite a shock for me. I think that's where I kind of grew up a little bit faster in my views, and luckily I had parents who explained certain things. But
Yeah.
I think when you experience it, it's even more impactful. And,
Oh, yeah.
versus when your parents telling you this and that and
Yeah.
this, and you know you're listening but you're not really listening sometimes.
Yeah.
But when you experience it yourself and you see it,
Can you remember some of the feelings, like those emotions that you were going through at that time? Because that's a big shift.
it was a tremendous shift. I really do remember just being on an airplane for the first time.
Yeah. Oh, it was
you
your
know?
first time on a plane.
First time even on a plane.
Oh, nice.
And I mean, we were very fortunate. I think the only seats they had was business class, and we were probably terrible.
Hey, that's not a bad way to go on your first flight.
Oh my
Dang.
God, those stewardess probably hated us. You know, they're like, okay, here's some more. What is this? Some more soda? Never seen a soda in my life. But when we moved there, I think there were some really good positive experiences of adventure and
Yeah, whole new place.
Exactly, opening your eyes to something. Wow, look at this major city.
Yeah, Moscow is a huge city, right?
city. And there's just a lot of history, and Mongolia in that time, it wasn't that as developed.
Yeah.
And not that I'm no expert when it comes to like economics or whatever that may be, but there were a lot of people struggling there still. You know, and I know a lot of my family's members, they're still struggling. Life's not easy over there.
Yeah.
But at least to see in my own world, to see how big the other parts of the world and other parts of the country,
Yeah.
it was eye opening for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I'm just grateful that able to see that with the family, not just alone, and you know, so.
Yeah. So how close, when you moved, you say you moved to Moscow, were you pretty much like in Moscow in the city, or were you sort of in a suburb and you had access to the city through public transit? What did that look like?
Okay, so when we moved to Russia,
Yeah.
when we moved to Moscow specifically, we actually were right in the downtown, almost like in the
wow.
almost heart of it, or at
that's
least.
cool.
Well, and what's incredible about Moscow is that they train, you know, the subway or however you want to call it, metro, right?
Yeah.
They have a big capital loop, and then you have different lines going down. So most people use the public transportation. You go fast.
Yeah.
And then the trains are going, and it's very deep too because they built during World Wars, and then you know, like it was shelter essentially.
Yeah.
And some of those stations they have those kind of memorials, or they still have those designs and from those like historical times in a sense.
That'd be cool to see. I know in Korea, when I was there in South Korea, a lot of the public transit, like the metro lines and everything, it's very developed underneath the city. So like it's not just a metro, but it's like a whole shopping center and an entire food court. And what I learned over my time there was that was sort of strategic because of a threat maybe from North Korea with any kind of bombing. They could move a heavy percentage of the population underground and be able to withstand whatever the conflict may have been until it was clear. So it's, you know,
out of necessity, right?
Yeah,
out of survival instinct.
Yeah.
And man, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And to go from seeing like herds, just playing outside, like
Yeah.
having a, first love
Yeah,
to go
right.
into a place where it's like, it's like on the explosion of capitalism,
Yeah.
it's like, wow.
Yeah, because there was an interesting political shift happening at that time too. This was from our previous conversation on the long drive, but you had talked about how and I don't know the specific date, you may, but there was sort of a shift when Gorbachev was sort of exiting and Putin was starting to come in as a political power.
Yeah.
Do you remember that
I
time
do
at all?
remember that specifically. And it's so, because his picture was everywhere.
Yeah.
And his picture was everywhere. And just like when you're campaigning anywhere else in the world. And I remember at that time, because the TV or just media was becoming more and more popular or more powerful.
Yeah.
Do you know the impact it can have when you see something on a screen and, it changes how you can view the world. It can change your mind, change your perspective.
Yeah.
And I remember there when I first moved there was definitely a shift or just change
Right,
in the city itself, because that was the capital of the country. So there was a lot of different things that were happening, a lot of things being built, a lot of things like technology.
construction stuff.
Yeah, and the technology was starting to come.
Yeah.
I remember cell phones were starting to come, little, not even a Razor, before Razor. Like there was
Yeah.
one with the
Was
little
it the-
antenna.
Oh,
The
yeah.
Matrix phones. Oh my God, right before 2000s. But for me to see that, and then, obviously we're able to go back to Mongolia to visit and to see the country that is still not changing.
Yeah.
Not as rapidly as like Moscow.
Yeah.
I'm sure parts of Russia wasn't being as developed either,
Right.
but just the city itself
Well,
there.
the fact that you were right in the heat of it, in Moscow, I'm sure they were growing more rapidly than any other place across the country.
Absolutely.
When you moved, was there any point in time where you went back to Mongolia to see some family who was still there? You kind of went back and forth. I mean, with your dad working for
Yes.
an airline, maybe that was kind of easy to do. I don't know.
Exactly. And that's one thing, luckily to my dad's job, we were very fortunate that
Yeah.
we're able to travel back and forth.
Yeah.
Realistically, if we didn't work, I don't think we'd be able to afford to fly. And that, I think, gave us a chance to be able to go back and forth and really share perspectives with people who are back home or the family members who are still in Mongolia. Or just living, we're able to share our experience with them, and or if they were there, and we're able to connect with them, and then that just opens up your world even more too, which is quite fortunate. I'm so lucky.
Because that's kind of unique, because you got to move to a new place, but at the same time, you got to see the comparison and contrast almost because of your ability to go back. So you were able to like take a snapshot of Russia and say like, okay, all these things are going on, and then come back home in a way and be like, okay, here's what's happening here. And it's almost like you got to see both developing at different rates and take all of that in. That's interesting, because a lot of times, if somebody's making a permanent move, they're not going back to the place they were before. And they might come back 15 or 20 years later or something, and it's like totally different. But you kind of got to stagger and break that up a little bit.
And I think that to think back on those moments, I think it's really important, because that's when really my mindset, or just being able to see that kind of a difference in just living and livelihoods and how places are.
Right.
I think that was a really impactful growing moment.
Oh yeah.
In a certain stage, because you really had to, now you're no longer a little boy, and we had to be a little bit more safe there too, because we didn't know a lot of people. And also the one thing I really did realize was that we were the only people who were not Russian.
Yeah.
We were, because we were in the center of the Moscow and the school we were even in, there wasn't any foreigners, or not as many foreigners.
Yeah, right.
It was mostly, 98% or 99.3%. It was like my sisters, my brothers.
Yeah.
We were the only Mongolians or foreigners in that school. And with that, you have to, there are certain discussions my parents immediately had to have, just so we're aware.
Yeah, prepared.
And even sometimes before they had those conversations or explained how really things were, you experience it.
Yeah, before they had a chance.
Before they haven't had the chance.
Yeah.
And it happens so quick because, obviously people who are not aware or not aware, people who are just not accustomed to seeing foreigners, obviously seeing something different or, or when somebody is different,
Yeah.
people get shocked. People have, certain things in them
Yeah.
that can't help themselves.
Well, I think that's, an interesting segue point because we talk about, and this was a focal point of our story planning process. And for anybody watching, just in case we didn't mention it, we're going to try and do like a short, not a short film, but, maybe something 7 to 8 minutes about this story. Because as we go through this, I think people will start to recognize how cool it is. And it's stood out more and more to me the more I hear it. But one of the elements of this is that being in a new place, looking different than a lot of the people who you were around, classmates and just people on the street or whatever, there was an element of maybe a little bit of discrimination, a little bit of racism, things of that nature that were challenges. When you go through that experience and you recognize that you're on maybe the losing end or the short end of the stick in certain scenarios, that sticks with you. And I think it also informs your behavior and your impressions in a lot of ways. And that's the segue point I want to make with you now, is talking about some of those challenges as you were in that critical time of your life. Because you moved there when you were 10 or 11, and you were there for 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm. 4.
4? Mm-hmm. So, 11 to, 10 to 15, to 10 to 14 or 11 to 15, like those are really important years as far as development for a young person. So tell me a little bit about that and those challenges. You've gotten into it a little bit, but I want to go further.
There were a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
And I will admit, and I will say this first, is, everybody has their challenges. Everybody's situation is unique. And I personally didn't think mine was special, it was just, or anything that was important, but it is an important factor in life to understand that we're not all the same. There are different people there. There are people come from different cultures. And the biggest understanding that I got from those years, me being there, more specifically, we're talking about just kind of the negative stuff, right? Obviously, there are a lot of positives too, but just to kind of more specifically talk about some of those negative experiences, let's just say, or experiences where you feel that you shouldn't, you're less than somebody.
Yeah.
You're worthless, or because you look somewhat different, you're beneath them.
Discrimination 101, right? It's like textbook.
So, and obviously, I have nothing against anyone. I don't hate this people because of this, or I hold a grudge against them this and because of them. Right. I personally don't. I will admit, because of how I have grown up and because of how my life has been, I do feel fortunate that I am strong-minded to not give away who I am.
Yeah.
And be taken down with those, negative comments.
Yeah.
Or this, you're this.
Right.
And not giving up to those kind of bullying, and putting you down.
Is bullying. But one of the things you mentioned in our previous conversations was, even though those things were definitely negative and definitely hurtful at times, you made a really profound statement, and it was that you had such a good family structure growing up that you understood your worth and you understood your value. And regardless of what these people were saying, you recognized that that's not true. I know what I am and who I am because I've had good supportive people around me in the form of family members who have always been there to support me. And that was something that you mentioned where I was like, that's absolutely the foundation of who you are. Like, despite all that negativity, you had something to fall back on, something to sort of tell you that I'm not going to pay attention to that. And I guess in some ways it makes you think about people who have really had, a rough upbringing where they didn't have supportive family or they didn't have people to guide them. And then they experience some of that stuff on top of it. That would suck, man. Like, you would be in a position where you really would be in a state where you're like, yeah, I am worthless. No one's ever told me anything different. Mm-hmm. But I think you were lucky in that way, despite the negativity of those events, because you had people who truly loved you and truly supported you in the form of mothers and fathers and brothers. Do you have a sister?
You have 2 sisters.
Yes. Yeah, you're 7 in your family, right?
7, yes.
Yeah, that was my mom too. She had 7. So
I am really thankful, and I'm so grateful for that, to have a family and to support you. And obviously there's times where you argue with them and stuff, and you have your days where you go a little
yeah, right.
But that's every sibling, and but to kind of continue on what we were discussing, where somebody is kind of, you feel those kind of discriminatory kind of experiences when people shouting, hey, go back, or whatever.
Yeah.
You do this, you're that. I knew that I didn't want to believe those words.
Right.
And a lot of people I know, they will take that to heart, and that will ruin their day.
Yeah.
That'll ruin their week, ruin their month, ruin their life. Now they're not happy, and now everyone around them is not happy because of what they've gone through or whoever they interact with. And to have a positive outcome or positive mindset from those kind of negative impacts, and those are some serious impacts, especially at that age we're talking about, growth, where you're like, oh man, like, who am I?
You're identifying who you are.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. It's like, oh, I'm a man, or like, who am I? Like, oh, I'm Mongolian, or I'm Russian, or whoever. It doesn't matter who you are. I think you are at that stage. You're like kind of
figuring it out.
You're figuring it out, and to have other people say, oh, you're nothing and you're worthless, and you're beneath us.
Yeah.
And then that can get to you, especially if you have a hard life at home and you don't have a brother or sister or mom and dad tell you, say, we love you regardless of who you, like what they say, because what they say is not true, because our love is true for you, and you are good.
Yeah.
Well,
I wanted to also ask about language similarity. I think there was a pretty good overlap there for you to step into Russia and have essentially all the working mechanics of Cyrillic and Russian that you needed to integrate from a language perspective pretty easily, right?
Yes, so that is true. I mean, language-wise, I didn't speak Russian at all. It is quite different.
Okay.
Yeah, as far as like words, vocabulary, I think some of the sentence structure is a little bit different as well too.
How did you deal with that?
So, man, did they just throw you into the wolves? Sink or swim.
Figure it out.
Figure it out. And then I was literally in the classroom, and I didn't even spoke Russian. Half the time, my first 6 months of school, I really had no idea what people were saying.
Yeah.
And I was trying to, obviously you were figuring out, because you got to figure out, you sink or swim. But I was very fortunate. Like, I met a couple of friends really quick, and they were just kind of helpful.
Yeah.
And they were nice. But there was parts of the school where people just, I'll be walking in the hallway. You get a little, a little sign here and there, or a little shout out. Right. Luckily, the first 6 months, I didn't know what they were saying, but 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 you feel it, they say, you can tell somebody's like, and saying something, you feel it.
Yeah.
Even if you don't understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of those experiences, and I didn't come home crying, and because luckily, for my family, for my brothers, we're like, they don't know what they're talking about.
Because they were in the same school as you during that time. So you were kind of, I guess you had each other.
We had ways. Like a little gang almost, getting a little.
The Mongolian kids.
No questions asked. You jump right in, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
But overall, to be honest, in Russia, we did feel a lot of that kind of discriminatory behavior from people who are, just random acts of kind of hate. It does happen, and there's no doubt about that. I you see it. And there were a couple of times my brothers and I will run away. Well, when we were walking home from school, we had to go a certain way because you see a couple of those skinheads walking, and if people don't know, skinheads in Moscow at the time were kind of a growing thing because yet again, to a point where kids are identifying who they are,
right?
And they just happen to be in that
fall
circle,
into that group,
fall to that group, and that's what was meaningful for them, or that's what they understand of who they are. So they come after certain groups of people that they hate, to make them feel who they are in a way, or feel belong, like you're part of something,
right?
And at the end of the day, that's what it is too. You want to belong to somewhere.
You do, yeah. Well, you had a really, I think, probably a tough time while you were in Moscow, but there was one instance that we discussed that was right around the time of the World Cup. And it was, from what you told me, it was after the Japanese team had defeated, I believe, the Russian national team. And there was some violence that ensued after that, targeted toward, Asian people, essentially, who were there in Red Square, it even sounded like. And, based on what you told me, it was sort of like a catalyst for you, and especially your mom, to be like, this is not good. We got to figure this out.
I'll never forget that moment.
Yeah.
I will never forget that moment because it was scary. It was really scary. I think that was, for me, not say climax, but that was a moment for me. I was like, wow.
It was like 2002 range.
2002 World Cup. So it was a 2002 World Cup. When we moved to Russia in 1998, that was my first World Cup that I ever saw.
Yeah,
it was Brazil versus France. Zidane scored. Man, he almost, I think he got a hat trick or something. He beat the Brazilians. It was crazy. Gosh. And that was the first time I remember my brothers and siblings and sitting there watching on a little Sony TV, like, going crazy, Right. And I was like, this is a World Cup.
Yeah.
And back to like how the world is huge. It's even bigger than this.
Yeah.
And being in that kind of a shock, like a kind of a, not say glamorous experience, but like a really discovery kind of experience.
Yeah.
It's like incredible, right? And then to go to school the next day and you're running away from skinheads.
Yeah, right.
Like, so you don't get beat up because you're Asian.
Yeah.
But in that next World Cup, so in 2002, obviously, like we were talking about, Russia was developing, or at least in Moscow, things were developing fast. So they built up these big screens for public viewing for World Cup. I think the first game, I think Russia won, so it was like super awesome.
Yeah.
And I remember we were kind of near that. And it was like always kind of a good environment, right?
Exciting.
You're like, yeah. And then I think they lost to Tunisia. And then that didn't cause too much of a riot or anything like that. I'm sure that would have been a little bit more minor. And then the game against Japan, Russia lost. I don't exactly remember the exact score, but there was 2 goals there. And that day, my mom specifically saying like they didn't want us to go towards the Red Square or the Kremlin because they had multiple TVs set up and it's like a public viewing.
Yeah.
And thank God for that. You know, and what are the odds of that? She probably had that kind of feeling. Like she didn't even know. Yeah, it's like, don't go. And that was a moment where I really saw how hatred can take over people because of differences, to see just because of a soccer game.
Yeah, sporting event.
Everybody lost. There was a huge riot. They're showing on the news the police running away from them.
Oh my
because
gosh.
they were not prepared for this kind of a riot or that kind of people on cars are burning. And I remember on the news saying how they attacked a lot of these Asian tourists. Probably not even Japanese, right?
They're just they're on tour.
It's like taking the picture, and it's like, man, amazing. And then I remember there were a couple of people that were killed, and I was just like, man, that could have been me.
Yeah.
And I think that was a moment where I was like, wow.
Yeah, it's a little. That's freaky. Especially considering that you were, in the city and.
Exactly.
I mean, you could have been there.
I could have been there, exactly, in the middle of it, right?
Yeah.
And then next thing you know. And very lucky to be. I don't know, life just works in mysterious ways,
does,
It's, but very fortunate to have that moment now. Obviously not fortunate because it was a quite a crazy event in life or event in history to see that. But to learn from that, to see and start to see the world in another new lens, right? And that's a moment I'll never forget. And I'm happy that we're here in the United States because that was a moment that my mom said, you know what, we're moving.
Yeah, we're getting out of here.
That's it. Because they were talking about staying in Russia for another couple of years because of the contract with for my dad's job, or going back to Mongolia. And that was it.
So tell me about that shift from Russia to the United States, because it sounds like you had the opportunity to visit the United States prior to making that move permanently. And along with that, there was sort of like a college visit where you got to see sort of like what the post-high school lifestyle of an American student looked like. What was that for you, that timeline?
That was actually a great moment. I'm so happy you asked me that question, because that was a moment. So in the summer of 2001, before obviously this riot and crazy things happening, right, or happened, in the summer of 2001, my family, we came here for a vacation because my aunt was living here in Maryland, Frederick, Maryland.
Yeah, not far away.
Not too far away from here, but it was like a nice little farmland, a little more quiet, right, from a bustling city town.
It's been developed a lot over that time.
So to come here and to visit, I had a really nice little summer vacation in the United States, and to be able to kind of see the culture difference here too, you know, to go from Mongolia to Russia to United States, and see those kind of differences. I was like, wow. And this was another level, right? Like just like you get like a new level up kind of thing.
But new badge.
No, but you know, like as far as like your view, your perspective, and how you thinking about other people, and you know, that was another eye-opening moment for me. So and also there was a moment where we helped my cousin towards the end of our summer trip. We helped our cousin to move into our dorm.
Oh, nice. That's a cool experience.
Oh, that was a very cool experience.
Because what were you, like 14 at that time or something?
14.
Yeah.
College girls running around. Just kidding. No. But like, I don't think that was... You know, people biking, you know, people getting ready for the school. You're like, man, it's like the movie,
right?
You know, and then the Maryland campus in the middle, it's open. You know,
that's a big school.
It is. It was huge. And my cousin, she was a sophomore, and she was like, "Oh, look at those freshmen." And I was like, I had no idea what she was talking about at the time. You know, so look at those freshmen moving into those dorms. And for me, I remember I was standing there and looking at this campus. You know, people. I was like, man, if I could go to a school, go to college, this is where I would like to go. Yeah. It was like a dream, you know, like such a distant dream, because when we were at that moment, there was no idea in my mind or any sort of thing, inclination of me living in the United States at the time, because my world was over there in Russia, and then we'll probably go back to Mongolia. Yeah. And to see that and dreaming like that was... I tell that story like to my brothers and sisters all the time. Now we kind of rekindle about our experiences, because I'm sure they had their own experiences,
their own
too,
perceptions
right?
of it. Did all of you go over? Like the whole family came over for that trip?
Almost. Okay. Almost everyone was there. That was a nice trip, because now to think about it, that was like one trip where everyone was together.
That's cool.
Like really together, you know, and wow.
Yeah, it's hard to pull that off sometimes. Yeah. And especially as you get older, it becomes even more difficult.
Because so difficult.
You add a family, you add children like you have now, and that's like, you know, you got to be able to make sure that they can come with you, or you find childcare or whatever that looks like. So, so that it seems like really solidified the idea that if that was possible, that would be like a dream scenario.
Exactly.
And the dream scenario came true. Thankfully, it allows us to sit here today and have this conversation. So what did that look like, that shift out of Russia? There's obviously, you know, another life shift. So you'd come from Mongolia to Moscow, big change. And now you're preparing for that next phase. A lot of the same emotions, or was there more excitement attached to it? What do you think?
I think this time there was more excitement, because I knew what was going on.
Okay.
I knew that we were moving this time. I think when we were moving to Russia, I had no idea where we were going still.
Right. Yeah.
You know, because I knew where we were going, I think there was definitely more excitement of the possibilities, you know, and I remember there were some schools, like famous Russian universities. You drive by. I wasn't that attracted to it, and they're very good schools. They're prestigious schools. I got nothing against those schools. I'm just, from my perspective, from a teenager boy, I remember thinking University of Maryland. I was like, wow, this is incredible. This is where I want to go to school.
Yeah.
You know, not necessarily just live there, but at least just go to school. And that dream did come true. And I'm actually really happy to say that was one of my dreams coming true.
Yeah.
Because I did graduate from the University of Maryland in 2011. Got a bachelor's, I was like, man, I can't believe.
Yeah.
And I was standing where I was standing when I first visited.
Oh, that's
and I
cool.
was like, something in my heart was like, or something in my body was just like, wow.
You like manifested it.
Yeah, I was like, wow, this is incredible. How did I get here? So thankful, so grateful. Wow.
Yeah. So before that, you were basically, you went to high school here in the United States for the most part. I guess you were probably like, was it freshman or did you start as a sophomore?
I started as a sophomore.
Okay.
They wanted me to be a freshman. I think they might even wanted me to be in like 8th grade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because they're like, you know,
who is this old ass man?
No, because I was turning 15.
Yeah.
So if I was turning 15, like I think you had to be like a freshman.
Yeah, they have cutoffs for these.
Yeah,
ages,
exactly.
depending on your birthday and all that.
So, and I remember I took a test. I did good on math and maybe not on English because I didn't speak English at all.
Yeah, what
either.
were your English abilities like at that time?
Man, non-existent. Hello?
Yeah.
How are you?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that would be tough.
Yeah. So as far as like language-wise, I was a little bit. Man, I didn't speak any English.
Right. Oh my
So
gosh.
we were in the ESOL program. I think that's also signifies a little bit that cultural difference. Is when we started school here. When I started high school here as a sophomore, I was already enrolled in an ESOL program, English as a second language program.
Right.
I feel like a lot of people may not even know that, but luckily the high schools, and some of the schools in the United States, fortunately have those programs to help people, people who don't speak who don't speak English, come to United States.
Right. That's a benefit of being in this area too, I think, because at least where I grew up in Salem, Missouri, there's like very little support for most foreign exchange students. It was already a really small school. But the one thing I've identified living here on the East Coast, especially around Washington, D.C., is it's very eclectic. Like there's a good mix of cultural representation here. And I think that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about too, is because you talked about how in Moscow, at least, it was like you were basically the outlier. There weren't really other foreigners there. But you talked about coming to the United States, and there was some representation of other ethnicities, representation of other cultures, and that was sort of, from the way you described it, a little bit of like a little bit
Relief.
of a comfort or a relief, right?
Oh, relief.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I remember so when we moved from Moscow to the United States, so we moved to Virginia, Falls Church, which wasn't too far.
Yeah.
We had like a little apartment there, like sharing a room with my brothers and sisters. Small apartment, but in Falls Church, it's still pretty close to the DC area, so it's pretty
it's very close,
diverse. And as far as like, remember, I think there was a lot of Asian community where we were.
Yeah, that area tends to have a higher Asian population.
Exactly.
So.
And it was like, oh man, I had, like, you know, people weren't looking at me walking down the street, put it this way.
Right.
Well, people weren't looking at me when we were on the metro or yelling at me, right? I'll never forget, I got yelled by this old lady in the metro in Russia. I tried to give this lady a seat.
Yeah.
And she was saying some racial slurs.
Like, what the heck, man? I'm trying to help you
I was
out.
like, okay, you know, being nice, manners, right? You're like, hey, come sit down. And she's like, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I don't know if I can even curse on this thing.
Something you're not allowed to say online.
Yeah.
Demonetized.
Oh my God. So I was like, wow. and to come to United States where it was a little bit more welcoming, even in school, right? They even get you a guide. They ask one of the volunteer students to show you around school.
Yeah, you like the buddy system.
Yeah, you're like, hey,
somebody to
here's the
help out.
locker, and then you see them at lunch, like, hey, and I was like, wow, so welcoming. You choose classes,
VIP treatment.
Yeah, and then you see kids driving.
Yeah,
You're like, wow, I thought we weren't allowed to drive till 18.
right. I think that should still be a rule here, but it is what it is.
But I wanted to drive because I was
Yeah.
like, I was always eager to learn.
A little freedom.
But luckily I learned on stick shift first. So,
Oh, dang.
Yeah. But neither here or there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but in the United States, or at least but the part of the United States where my family moved, obviously every part of the country is a little bit different. Every state is a little bit different, right?
Sure.
And that's the beauty of this country too, and it's that kind of diversity I think unites people.
Oh yeah.
And obviously
Divides and unites. It's an interesting dynamic.
You can't have both, yeah. And ideally, I think the ultimate goal is to have people united.
Yes.
Or have that kind of peace, or have that compassion, or have that understanding of another, how different they are and what they might feel. But I see that more in the United States, in certain parts of maybe the country or whatever it may be. But for me as a whole, as the United States now, it has those elements. May not be better than other countries, or maybe worse than some other countries, but end of the day, it's there.
Yeah.
And I do believe it. And that's another cherished box that I have in my heart.
Yeah.
So no one can touch that.
No. Well, as we navigate toward the person you are today, and the things that stand out most to me as I've had the chance to interact with you is you're a black belt in Jiu Jitsu, first and foremost.
Still can't believe it.
That's amazing, and I'm honored. I have to say again, thank you for letting me be a part of that ceremony as you received that black belt and film and photograph some of that, because that was really cool. I'd never seen something like that before. And I think looking at that from the outside in, I didn't also appreciate the effort and the amount of time that it took you to build yourself up to that point. Because if you're walking in for the first time and seeing that, you're like, oh, good job. But it was years of sacrifice and work and commitment on your end in order to get to that point. And the other element of your life from a kind of like defining or work perspective, from what I know of you, is your sommelier. Sommelier?
Sommelier. Yeah, you got it. Sommelier.
Sommelier. Mm-hmm. So you're basically like a badass with wines. Like you know everything about everything when it comes to what a great wine is. And you even have like a lot of mixology and other elements of that expertise when it comes to drink making, which is awesome. But
it's handy at parties.
Oh
sure.
yeah, it's a killer party trick. But those are two things I think about you that I want to work toward a little bit, because they're not endpoints. I don't want to say they're endpoints, but they represent sort of the result of going through certain things in life. As we discussed, and this is also part of our storyline for our video, but talking about being a black belt, there's an element of balance and peace and calm, but also self-defense that is associated with that art form. And then you look at the side of the sommelier, there's a whole like social element, a communication element that goes into that. And I want to talk now about that evolution from you're in the United States, you're beginning to now socially flourish, and maybe you're reflecting a little bit on certain things that were not as positive in Russia, and looking at, how do I get myself to a point of preparedness or be able to better defend myself and my loved ones? Where did you start to introduce those things into your life?
Well, I think it was always somewhat there, especially when I start to feel in Russia, for example, when I start to see this kind of a hatred against others and discrimination. You see certain, not even just like Asians specifically, but everyone, you know, because you're yellow, purple, green, whatever, neon.
Right.
They have something against you, or they have something to say against you.
Yeah.
And when I saw that kind of riot happen in 2002 in Moscow, and the police were running away, and they were hurting people, who looked like me. I think that was an impact that I was like, man, I gotta know how to protect myself.
Yeah, because these other people may not do it for me.
Exactly. And because you see cops running away, the people who are supposed to protect you make you feel safe. But we're so not safe. You're so not safe.
No.
Because somebody can, like, you see those videos now too, even when the people getting punched randomly on the street.
Oh yeah,
those things.
It's ridiculous, but it happens.
It happens, and it was happening. I'm sure it still happens now at some point, and we don't see it as much. But I remember thinking that moment where I was like, man, I gotta learn. And in Russia too, I also saw Sambo, which kind of exposed me to kind of the martial art aspect or combat sport aspect. I didn't quite necessarily train in Moscow, but wrestling has been a big part of my life because Mongolians that's part of national sport.
Yeah.
So
wrestling
I didn't know
that.
Yes, archery, horseback riding.
Yeah, those are
Are three exactly iconic sports. And there's actually a festival in Mongolia that happens every summer.
Yeah,
it's called Nadam, where it's like a tournament, right? And they've been having these tournaments for centuries now.
Right.
Horseback riding, you see little kids on the horse with no saddle, nothing, just going.
Yeah.
And they're going fast.
Like
too.
the ancient Olympics. It's been
yeah,
around forever.
Exactly. Mongolian, Olympics.
Yeah.
And they actually have nomadic games now, I believe.
That's
nomadic world games.
Hashtag nomadic games.
Yeah, maybe they'll come and I would love to see that, and that's part of another world that sometimes if you're in the United States, you
don't see that, yeah.
You're clueless. You have no idea.
Like, come on, ESPN. Let's get some coverage.
Yeah, listen, world's most unique sport, or eccentric sport,
right?
I may even call it. No, but I think it's unique because that history and heritage of who you are or who you are as a nation, or who your roots are, it's there, and I think that helped me to be who I am today and
That's
who
cool.
I've developed to be.
Yeah,
and to see that growing up too, and when I was in the United States, and luckily I was, given an opportunity to train or learn jiu-jitsu, I was actually looking for boxing because that's one thing people automatically assume that's how you should learn how to fight.
That's how you fight, right? You punch.
A punch, yeah. And you see it, and don't take me wrong, if you're a good boxer and you know how to punch, you can knock somebody out.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I see Muhammad Ali. He's an amazing fighter. You see some of the new guys that are in the boxing. Man,
lay some guys down.
Oh, man. I don't want to get punched. So, no way.
Yeah. But I think your evolution into the jiu-jitsu training is so much more practical in so many ways. And in a lot of ways, I think also the training behind jiu-jitsu, as you described it to me, it's not really about incapacitating someone necessarily. It's about neutralizing a situation.
It is.
Like if things are getting out of control, this is a way to subdue and neutralize the aggressor.
It is.
Yeah.
So you described it really well. And what's also important too is that if you're the person it works the other way too, where let's say somebody is attacking you and they're putting you in a bad position. If you're trained jiu-jitsu, for example, or for me personally, here's what I experienced. I experienced that when there's that kind of pressure, right? There's this uncomfortable situation. It back to kind of originally what we kind of said, it kind of shows you who you really are.
Oh yeah.
In those kind of situations, you really, it like show what you're made out of.
Yeah.
And I think that's why jiu-jitsu for me became so important aspect of who I am today, because of that. Because you are put through a struggle or difficulty, obstacle, and see if you can overcome out of it.
Yeah.
And it's more of this like almost this naturalistic element of fighting, and somebody even just holding you down, and if you just give up and lay down,
just somebody sitting on you, what are you going to do?
But you have to, and when you show a technique, it's like, you can escape from here. This is what you need to do. And you learn that. And when it works.
Oh, dude. I mean, I feel like a fish out of water when I am around you doing jiu-jitsu. And I want to do more of it because that first session we had.
Yeah, that was good.
when you're first getting into it, it's just so mechanical. It's like, okay, now I need to execute step B and step C, but getting to appreciate where you are in your jiu-jitsu journey, it's like water, man. It's just like you're flowing, because even before a move happens, you're identifying, I know what I need to do in order to get myself into a defensive position, an offensive position, whatever you need in order to make sure that next move is planned and strategic, and it's going to be advantageous for you during the combat. And the way you move is like,
Thank you.
I don't bend like
I'm
that.
still learning,
I don't
and
bend
that's
like
the truth. It's that with jiu-jitsu, you're always learning.
Yeah.
You're really always learning, and you learn from a white belt, you learn from a blue belt, you learn from everyone. I think that kind of mindset is shown on the mat, or you experience it on the mat. And if you have a good culture at an academy, where they kind of foster that kind of environment of improvement, and and empowerment,
right.
I think that's, and then you have the learning component on top. It's so powerful. It works.
Well, where'd you first get involved with it? Because that sounds like there was an interest while you were in Russia, but you didn't really start exploring it until you got over here. So what were some of your first experiences getting into like a dojo, or you now have two incredible mentors who are super talented. I think that came later down the line, but.
Yeah, well, the jiu-jitsu came into my life at a moment, I think, when I needed it the most, because that's when I kind of felt lost. I was happy. So I was in college, must have been like freshman in college.
Okay.
And then I had a scholarship for a first year, and then I lost it.
Oh, shoot.
It was bad, right? And I remember I was like, oh man, what am I going to do? How am I going to pay? I'm going to work. And I was like, but also I need to learn how to protect myself too, because some people got robbed at my job.
Oh, yeah.
They're like walking out. So I was a
extra
server
motivation.
at the time, and they come out, and then some people were just waiting for them. And that was like a quick little reminder. It was like, hey, my friend's like, let's go learn how to box, and then his sister's boyfriend was like assistant coach or something like that. But when I went to try out the boxing, the only class that was available was a jiu-jitsu class. And that was an incredible moment, because
Just so happens.
it just so happens. Yeah. And the guy who was teaching the class, he was also the owner of the academy.
Nice.
His name is Professor Jeff Gordon.
Yep.
And he
Not the NASCAR driver.
yeah, he's not the NASCAR driver, but like the NASCAR driver,
Yes.
Jeff Gordon.
Yeah.
Yes, he does drive fast. Oh man, he does drive fast. I've seen him, but he is my jiu-jitsu instructor. He's been my mentor from the beginning as a white belt, and he had his own academy that had like mixed martial arts. There was wrestling, and there was a lot of different other martial arts there, or disciplines there. But it was like a gym.
Yeah.
It was like a gym. People come and train. And then I would say really my jiu-jitsu training like got ramped up when I was a blue belt.
Yeah.
Before that, I think it was more like, oh yeah, I'm learning something. It was like I come once, twice a week, or there was times where I come a little bit more. And then towards when I was trying to get a blue belt, I was training a little bit more.
Yeah.
But once I got my blue belt, or maybe a little bit after I got my blue belt, we had a head instructor, Tony Passos, come.
Yeah.
And
He's Brazilian, right?
He's Brazilian. He's from Recife. He's an incredible guy. He's incredibly smart, and he is an expert in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
But he's most importantly an amazing human being off the mat.
Yeah. He seemed like a great teacher. Just based on the conversation that he gave the entire audience at the end of that ceremony, you could tell he really cared about these people's improvement, not just in jiu-jitsu, but as people in life.
And I want to thank you for coming and film that, and
Yeah, man,
because
it was
at that
fun.
moment I don't think we've worked as long together with each other, but
No,
I
not at all.
knew
Yeah.
I was like, man, this guy's cool. I was like, I can hang with this guy, and it was meant to be, and I'm thankful for that, because what are the odds of that, us linking, our paths crossing to be here now?
A random wedding out in the middle of nowhere. Thank you, Tolman.
Oh
Media.
my God! Wait, isn't it priceless?
They've rebranded.
Oh, okay.
But, I think Tolman has some trouble now. But
Oh, okay. Oh man. But I'm grateful, regardless how those things, and we came to be here, and in my jiu-jitsu journey, you know, I don't think I said I was like a jiu-jitsu black belt to you. I don't say that to people like that all the time.
Hey, by the way,
Walking around with my belt.
yeah, wrapped all around your waist at all times.
With bandana. Oh my God, that'd be terrible.
That's got to be some sign of disrespect.
Oh yeah, that'd be well with jiu-jitsu. You know, I think now with mixed martial arts and UFC, I think there's a little bit this. I gotta get attention, so they get a little bit of loud and roary, but
macho.
Exactly.
Conor McGregor one.
Oh yeah. I mean, if they're making money and they're making them happy, that is what it is. And for me, I think jiu-jitsu bring different kind of happiness. You know, different kind of wealth, and for that, I'm so thankful because it is part of who I am today. And I am so thankful to Professor Jeff Gordon, Professor Tony Passos, and I've been training with them primarily most of my jiu-jitsu career.
Yeah.
Well, all of my jiu-jitsu career. And to go to each different ranks. And, you know, I'm honored and I'm privileged and I'm grateful that I had that opportunity to learn. Because as a jiu-jitsu instructor, it's a long time for someone to get to that level.
Oh yeah.
You know, I could imagine them seeing me as a blue belt. They're like, man, this guy doesn't know anything. You know,
it's
they're
like
like,
a lot
man,
of growth. Well, I think one of the things about jiu-jitsu too is that for someone like myself, you know, I come from a very conventional sports background. Love basketball. You know, grew up playing basketball, tennis, American football, soccer as a younger kid. These things represent sport to me. When I think about sports, I think about those things. Baseball, another one. I played a lot of baseball growing up. Jiu-jitsu is absolutely a sport. And if you think that it's not a workout, you're gonna be reminded very quickly that it will kick your ass if you're rolling on the mat and you're with somebody experienced and you're trying to actually go at it. If somebody's out there who's like, man, I think, you know, I'd like to try jiu-jitsu, what advice would you give them? Like, how could you get started in a way that would allow you to kind of stick with it? What are some points that you'd give other people?
If somebody is starting out in their jiu-jitsu journey or if they're interested, one of the biggest advice I give them is at least give it 3 classes.
Okay.
Not just one class. Give it at least 3 class trial, you know? Right. Let's say trial, but well, essentially kind of what it is. At least go try it 3 times because the first class, you get to acclimate to what's going on. You get an idea. And if you're scared, if you have anxiety problems, you know, sometimes you don't really retain any of that information.
It's just out the ear.
And it is a bit of an overload, you know, you don't realize. And you can get sometimes a little bit close to, you know, because it is kind of a grappling sport, which is like, you know, you're grabbing each other, you're wrestling, you know, and a lot of people don't like wrestling either. You know, it
can feel awkward to be that close to someone who you don't know very well.
Exactly.
Right? You're like, what?
Yeah, what is going on? Especially now too, right after all this has happened. And to think that, and to explain that to somebody, you're like, hey, I'm going to be hugging your head really tight and you're going to try to get out.
Choke you out.
Yeah. Listen, make sure to tap. Tap? What do you mean tap? And they're tapping themselves. They're like, tapping yourself doesn't work. But the second advice I would give is, well, first, at least try 3 classes.
Yeah, that's great.
And finish all those 3 classes. And after that, you can make your decision whether you want to continue. But the second advice I can give to somebody is that if you are a person who wants to learn to better themselves, jiu-jitsu is the sport for you. Or jiu-jitsu is the hobby for you. Jiu-jitsu is your outlet for you. That I believe that.
Yeah. It's brought a lot of balance into your life.
Oh, absolutely. And it will bring you, I think, balance in your life, which is exactly where I was going to go. The third advice I'm giving to people or to students or people who do it, I say it brings you balance because when you train on the mat, you're focused on yourself. You focus for even 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour, you're learning a new skill that could be life-changing for you.
Life-saving.
Life-saving, right? Life-saving. And so, and that kind of a thinking or being able to micro-focus kind of bring balance to a lot of people when there's like Instagram and people calling you,
all the
texting you,
distractions.
emails, all the distractions, right? And jiu-jitsu is even more helpful now because of all the technology that has developed. You know, for me to come from a country where there was barely any TV to move to a country where it was like kind of developing, and then move to a country where it was like, boom, a high-speed train of technology, you know, and for me to adapt that. And I think I retain part of who I am or what where I come from in my heart still, and then that keeps me balanced. But when I was lost in the United States, and like when I was in college, like beginning college, you know, you're going through some difficulties, and I was kind of lost. And starting jiu-jitsu brought me that balance, and I always think about that moment too, because that is something I always sought after. You know, because of who I am and because of how, and it was made more clear as I trained jiu-jitsu more. Because that was something I desired more, and I didn't even know it at that time.
Yeah, I kind of got addicted to it a little bit.
Exactly, and it is very addictive, you know, and because you want to train better, you want to learn a new technique, and then you start to eat better, and then people around you training better, so you want to get better. So you're surrounded by a community of people who want to help you, and you're empowered, and you have this bridge that can bring you closer to who you want to become. Go through this transformation, you know, and have that kind of support. And that's one thing I did see in jiu-jitsu also that was meaningful for me and then resonated with me, is that balance was brought, or however difficulty, obstacles you had to overcome, it was brought by the support of the people around you. Just like when I was facing difficulties when I was in Russia, for example, and, you know, I had my family to support and say, this is who you really are. And with the jiu-jitsu, I think that's how I feel, is because on the mat when you're training and you're learning jiu-jitsu, you're breaking a sweat, and you know, fighting for your life.
You're focused on that moment.
Focus on that moment, and you know, you overcome those obstacles, wherever it may be, small, big. You able to see who you really are. And I think that can really bring you that kind of balance that people don't see. It is invisible, and it is hard. It is something that's not out there, you know, and sometimes even though we may know it, we might not see it or think it. And sometimes we need to be reminded that. And I think a lot of those life lessons, you learn it on the mat, which is incredible. And
take it from this guy, for anyone watching, that this if you apply yourself, I think this is true, and you've lived this, and you've experienced this, and you've seen the benefits and the outcomes, and even though I think, you know, it's challenging, there's no doubt that it's a really, you know, difficult path to go through that. I mean, you're a very physically fit guy, you're very flexible. I think, you know, people who are maybe not in that same boat would have a couple more challenges, but to stick with it and to sort of kind of like persevere through those things, those benefits will come in time. And I know you've got big goals for jiu-jitsu in your life still, things that you want to develop as far as being a teacher, opening, you know, your own facility, being able to operate in that capacity, which you're already kind of on that journey. And I want to circle back to that. What I want to go back to is actually your love of the other side of your life, which is being a sommelier, you know, and sort of figuring out how you got involved with that. Because I think that's something that has allowed you to work in some of the poshest restaurants in DC, like Masseria, beautiful place. And is it Michelin over there?
It is a Michelin star restaurant. Yeah, that is correct.
So you're, you know, basically a floor captain, right, for this Michelin star restaurant. But it took time to get to that place where you could walk in and apply to a place like that, and they would, you know, bring you in. So where did that journey start for you?
So that journey started when I started bartending. And so I was kind of, when I was serving, and then I moved into the bartending at like a Mexican restaurant, learning how to make margaritas. There was a moment where I was feeling kind of lost, and I left that job because I wanted to find something new. And that place was in DC, and it was like mixology was coming into, like, it was like the wave, you know, and I was riding that wave, and I was like right place, right time, you know, the right
all the
person.
fancy drinks,
exactly.
Yeah.
But I started there So I started at that place as an apprentice, and I moved on to be a principal mixologist. And
That's a hell of a title. Principal
yeah, I know they had
mixologist.
all the with people with titles, jobs with titles, right? A principal. I think they was like bar chef or something like that, or
I like it.
mixologist.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't know that was that kind of term because that was the beginning of an explosion in the hospitality industry as far as like drinks, cocktails. Yeah, I mean, the wine industry has always been there. I think sommeliers have been there.
Oh, yeah.
But I think this is that period of time. It was time for like the cocktail time,
Right.
spirits time. People
Yeah.
doing some cool stuff and then making infusions.
Yeah.
I think now infusions technically is like an old thing, but at the time when I was there, young,
Still creative as
yeah,
hell. It's really cool.
So I was very fortunate to be there, and there also I had to apply the similar kind of skills or the similar kind of training I was doing in Jiu Jitsu, where I had to kind of drill a little bit more, give a little bit that micro focus to learn about the ingredient, for example, or the measurements of the drinks, because at that time people just free pour,
Right.
you know, and we were like using jiggers and tools that are pretty popular now if you see it in the industry or if you see like a craft cocktail bar.
Yeah.
You can see the ice and, you know, but that evolution kind of was happening as I was there, which is incredible. And at a time, it came at a time when I've also felt lost.
Yeah.
So I found that passion almost at the same time when I started jiu-jitsu as well.
Yeah, and you talked about it kind of being like a little bit more on the social side. Like jiu-jitsu was very much, it's social, no doubt, because you're interacting with so many other people, but I think it's definitely probably more on somebody's physical side of development when it comes to what that's really instilling in you. And then like on our car ride, we talked about how with, you know, being a sommelier, learning that side of things, it put you into environments where, you know, you're at a bar or you're at a restaurant, highly, highly social environment. And what did that look like for you? Do you feel like it improved those social abilities, or did you feel like you had to like push outside of your comfort zone a little bit to operate fluidly in those environments?
So when I was in the restaurant environment or that kind of hospitality environment, I actually felt very natural there.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it came, obviously there was moments you have to learn the food, the drinks,
Right.
and steps of service maybe.
Yeah.
But one thing I did feel, I think, and I felt more natural is because of who I am also too,
Yeah.
is that there's this communal aspect, right? You want to show people
Yes, exactly.
hospitality and really take care of them, show them a really good time. I think that kind of also just naturally came out of me because that is who I am, and that's how it is in Mongolia also too. You know, you're taking care of people around you,
Very
your
communal.
family, communal.
Yeah.
And I think when I worked in a restaurant, especially when you get closer to your coworkers, your other bartenders, servers, even busters and the dishwashers, even wherever, whoever the guy even cleans the window, I was always friendly with them.
Yeah.
I was even more friendly with the guy on the grill because he'll give me a nice little slice of carne asada, you know?
End of the night, you get a little
Oh,
take
yeah.
home.
But I think that aspect, I really did feel that communal, and it was something resonated with me with who I am. And I may not have realized it right there and then, but I knew it was something I wanted to do in my heart. So, and I'm thankful for that because that has evolved from that moment to where I'm now. I'm very lucky to be working at a Michelin star restaurant as a sommelier, have a wine program that's incredible.
Yeah.
We'll be able to taste some of those incredible wines and
Some rare stuff too.
some
right?
rare stuff. And I think, and you're always learning too. You're learning about the history, geography, you know, different regions, different producers and their stories.
Yeah, the size of that book on your table. I was like, because when I visited you, I was looking through that. I was fascinated by that. I was like going into soil texture and you know acidity and nitrogen content. Like it was a chemistry lesson.
It is.
But I think it all played a role in, you know, how that product turns out. And it's not just Masseria. I mean, you've gotten to work in some other really incredible restaurants around the city.
Yes, that I'm very lucky because, you know, obviously it comes from the work of paying attention to what's going on around you,
Right.
And giving a little bit of time to learn. I think that's what's important, having that mindset of learning.
Yeah, it takes time.
It takes time. And I was fortunate to work at Del Mar on the wharf.
That's
to be
a beautiful
exposed.
spot.
Oh, beautiful place. And then that's one thing I really do enjoy is that most of the wineries that you reading about or you tasting or you talk to friends about, you see it in the store. It's most times it's in a beautiful place.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, unless it's in a factory and they're pumping them out. But
Yeah.
most of the wines that I'm looking into, it is always in a beautiful place, and that really brings me joy. I think it brings you a little bit of that happiness.
And it's exploration. You go back to talking about moving from Mongolia to Russia to the United States. You're in a new place. You're exploring. You got a new wine. You're exploring. You're learning. It's always this next step of exploration, and I think it keeps you fresh and it keeps you curious in a lot of ways too. So I think when we first met, you had talked about, wanting to expand on that skill set by going abroad and doing a workshop or a workshop or something of that nature in like Italy. Did you do that or
Not yet.
Okay, it's something you want to do.
Unfortunately, yes, it was in
Okay.
my plans. So I did wanted to go to Italy, and that was actually in my plans because I was studying a lot of Italian wine.
Yeah.
And I wanted to take a trip and really discover Italy, and I was fortunate to be able to travel in Europe when I was living in Moscow, just fly a couple of places.
Yeah.
We didn't obviously travel lavishly, no
Right.
5-star hotels or anything like
Maybe
that.
the perks of having a dad who works for
Yeah, exactly. It was
the
we were able
airlines.
to fly for free and
Yeah.
stay with friends and family.
That's so
and
cool.
Exactly. And one place we didn't really get a chance to go to was Italy. And surprisingly enough, I ended up at a place where I really loved being a sommelier. Was an Italian place.
Yeah.
Because I loved the wine. It was a new place that I didn't really get to discover while I was over there.
Right.
With so much history, and so
Yeah.
much good food too.
Especially in the culinary
Oh my
zone.
God, it's
Like,
so rich, wealth of
Italy's
oh my-
right at the top, pretty much.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I was planning a trip, obviously, and that was in 2020.
Yeah. Right when the pandemic was really.
Pandemic, yeah. So I took the test in February, and then March 15th was everything shut down. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow,
That's when I moved to DC.
wow. I couldn't imagine.
Literally
for you.
March 15th. Parked the car. Was like,
What's going on?
all right, here we go. This will be fun.
How did they notify you that you can't go anywhere?
Oh,
How did you hear?
Well, for me, I was actually driving. So I had,
News
pretty much
on?
everything I had that I was going to move up here with in the car and on a little hitch on the back. And I was just listening to BBC. 2 a.m., driving through the mountains in West Virginia, getting ready to park it at the apartment or the basement complex where I first moved in the city. And they were just reading it over the, the radio. It was like, well, tomorrow America will institute the essential work order, or whatever it was. It was like,
I can't remember what they
it was
did.
the lockdown basically. So they were just saying like, we're going to start putting a lockdown into effect. Only really essential work individuals are going to be continuing to work. And that was just my intro to DC in 2020.
Wow.
It was like, this is not good. And I ended up cleaning swimming pools for 7 months.
Wow.
It was disgusting work. It paid the bills, and I'm appreciative that it did that.
Oh, man.
But it sucked. Yeah.
I can't believe it. That's crazy.
So it robbed me of that year, but it robbed you of an opportunity. Hopefully something that you're able to do still. And now things mostly being back open, I think if you want to pursue that, if you
Yes.
can
Oh,
make
that's
the
on my
time.
list. It's back on my list
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
It's making it to the top, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I do want to go back to Europe as
Mm-hmm.
well. I did get a chance to go back to London
That's cool.
for my friends, and we went to a lot of different cocktail bars. So it was nice to kind of
Yeah.
touch up on that side of. I think being a sommelier for me is being able to understand all aspects of beverage related service, for example, knowledge, and then being an expert. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm an expert now,
No, but
it's
you're
'cause there's a
highly
lot.
knowledgeable. Like when
Thank you.
we've
Thank you
gone
for
out
that.
and eaten with you, it's like it's a lesson. It's an educational lesson about what is in this drink and how it's all working together to make the taste that you're tasting.
Yeah. And it makes you appreciate things more
Yeah, it
because you
does.
understand it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're like, oh, that's how long it took to make this little ice
Yeah.
cube, and appreciate those little things. And I'm glad I can share that with people, but I don't share it to people who don't want to listen.
Right.
That's one thing I definitely do learn from jiu-jitsu and learn from training is that you have to be efficient, because your time is so valuable.
Right.
And life is not worth to be spending it on people who don't deserve your time.
Yeah.
Or they don't bring you joy or happiness, or they don't help you in a way that they should help you.
Yeah, you have to be selective there. You really do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm proud to call you a friend in DC. I have very few friends in DC, but you're one of them. And it's because of who you are and what you've taught me. And
Nice,
the
likewise.
appreciation that has come out of that. But I think where you're at now, you have a beautiful family, amazing wife, and you are still growing. You're still learning. And I think that you have some goals for jiu-jitsu and, your abilities as a sommelier that you still want to expand upon. And I wanted to kind of wrap things up by hearing those goals and sharing some of the lessons that you feel like you've been able to learn from all of this to sitting here today.
Great. Well, first of all, man, like I said, it is an honor and privilege
Thank you.
To be here,
Yeah,
at least share
man.
this moment and having this discussion.
I've been wanting to do it for a long time.
Yeah, I'm glad it finally happened.
Yes.
And things happen when it meant to happen,
They do,
and I don't take these moments for granted because just like in life, things happen fast.
Yes.
And things can change quick.
Yeah.
And from my experiences, just growing up, from moving to another country, and to be here, I am blessed, and to have a family now and a young family.
Yes.
We're growing still, and myself as a black belt, I'm technically a very young black belt.
Yeah.
That's growing in a new way. And even as a sommelier, I think I'm more of an mid-career, I'm not even saying like mid-career sommelier.
Yeah.
Even learning. I think with wine and jiu-jitsu both, that's one thing I see is that there's so much to learn.
Oh, yeah.
Like I never say I'm the master of this and
Yeah.
I'm the absolute master of this and that.
You do 10,000 hours or more.
Yeah, and I'm still doing more. And then there's still so much more to learn. And that's what keeps you humble, and gives you that humility.
Yep.
And I think that's important for any individual to understand or have that little bit of humbleness.
Yeah,
inside.
regardless of your field, right? There's always
Regardless of
somebody
your
out
field,
there.
There's always somebody out there.
Yeah.
And having that kind of a mindset will help you grow even more.
Yeah, I agree.
And I see that a lot in jiu-jitsu. And luckily the years I've been training as a student and the years I've been lucky to be able to kind of coach people on the mat who are just starting out.
Yeah.
Because I started teaching jiu-jitsu or coaching or teaching classes when I was a blue belt.
Yeah.
And then it was really thanks to Professor Jeff Gordon at Infinite Fighting Concepts in Maryland, where I had that kind of opportunity to be able to, that he believed in me, said, you know what, you're good enough to be able to teach these people who know less.
Yeah, right?
You know, maybe tiny bit, but they don't know anything.
Don't know anything, yeah.
So, but obviously I trained them more, and obviously they know, and they saw something in me, and they believed in me, and they helped me and encouraged me, empowered me, and I was able to learn and improve myself, most importantly.
Yep.
And that has helped me to be who I am today.
Right.
Even more. And I see that more now because now I'm a parent.
Yeah.
Not even just a coach, I have
The
someone,
ultimate teacher.
Yeah, ultimate teacher, and having to be a balance of, being a strict dad or fun dad and this and that. Now you're learning a complete different new field, a new lens again.
It's your new career.
Fatherhood. Exactly. It's like that's a lifestyle right there.
Yeah.
No, but I enjoy being a father now, and I feel blessed, and that brings me more joy than anything. And but your life doesn't stop just to stop there. It's not a movie, right? It's like it doesn't end there. It keeps going. And I think it's important to understand that in jiu-jitsu or in learning about wine, I never stop learning.
You shouldn't. I think if you stop learning, you're going backwards.
Going back.
Because everything else is moving forward. And it's your responsibility, if you want to be on the edge of it, to keep up with it.
Keep up with it.
You have to.
And keep that drive. you know, and how do you keep up that drive? And then I think just training jiu-jitsu and having that kind of passion for a healthier living, because now your reasons or your purpose is even more clear. So that can motivate you so much more. And I see that as a father too, that I have something more that I want to offer to them and be able to pass on the knowledge or pass on what I know so they can live a little bit safer life.
Yeah.
You know, live a slightly better life. And I want to give them, you know, a little bit of the knowledge that I have. You know, I don't have a lot of riches, but I do have a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
You know, that I'm still learning, that I'm able to at least share with them that will help them.
Right.
And have that kind of a balance to come from training jiu-jitsu or finding that balance. It took a long time too. It was a journey. It's a process. It just didn't happen overnight.
No.
And
You've been doing it, what, 10, 11, 12 years?
13 years.
13 years.
Yeah, so I started in 2008.
Yeah.
December of 2008. You guys can do the math. But it has been a long time, and I never chased the belt. That's one thing I would never say. It was like, oh, I wanted that belt. Oh, I wanted that belt.
Yeah, you were just doing it because you loved it.
Because I loved it. Because it brought me more joy.
Yeah.
And, you know, it gave me more discipline or helped me in the times when I was going through difficulty, that able to focus on myself, to better myself. And then as soon as you're more happier or more joyful, people around you want to be around you more, you know, because you bring them more joy too.
Right.
And bring more happiness to them. And I think that's important to have that nowadays, because there's a lot of hate in the world. You can't deny that. And one of the reasons I remember thinking I want to open a jiu-jitsu academy, and it's like, it was like a dream. I was like, you know, it's such a distant dream. And, you know, like I wasn't even a black belt. And I was like, black belt was nowhere in sight. But I remember seeing some of this hate towards Asian people more specifically.
Yeah.
In the United States, right? In the United States, where, you know, part of me maybe had this little fantasy how, you know, everybody be happy together in the United States, and it's not. No. You know, every place has their flaws, and I saw that here, and I saw that kind of happening, and, you know, essentially technically the most diverse part of the country, or one of the more diverse part of the country, you see hate. Yeah. You see, you know, hate towards a particular group. You see discrimination, and you see these violent attacks towards people too, elderly people. Oh my God, that one breaks terrible. My heart. That one, like, man, that's one of the reasons I'm like, man, I want to open an academy. That'll be a dream to come true. And then for me, that seems so far away, but now it's starting to become a reality. And it's more. Like,
it's exciting, man.
And I'm excited, you know, hopefully a year from now, or however long, hopefully it'll be where I want it to be, and I can find a new goal, you know, and build be able to build on that. Exactly. Just like the moment I told you how I feel right now is that moment when I was standing with the diploma at University of Maryland campus right after graduation. You know, I was like, wow, what a journey for me to come here. Because that was, when I was standing there, that was 2001. When I graduated, it was 2011, because it took me a year or two longer. But man, that was 10 years for me from that moment, me standing on that campus, to graduating. Yeah. And then now to think, when I got a blue belt to where I am today, I'm like, wow, I'm signing a lease to have 6 more months of maybe opening a dojo, and the dream coming a reality. You know,
that's super. I'm just pumped for you, man.
I mean, regardless of what happens, you know, you never know what the outcome is going to be, but you can't be afraid.
I mean, there are steps forward and steps back, but
exactly.
I think the trend is upward.
I actually hope so. And I hope my journey, end of the day, will inspire others. Yeah. Hopefully inspire them. Hopefully bring them hope that they're not alone, or hope that you can change your life. Yeah. You can chase those dreams and not be afraid. And I really do hope that even if it's just one person, I think I'll be really, really happy. Yeah. Like truly happy. And
well,
life.
You've done so much already, and you're gonna do so much more. I know that. But as a final question, this is the wealth of self, and it's about identifying, you know, what is it that makes people wealthy, And I think it's very obvious that, a financial security and financial riches and things of that nature, nice, sure. But is it the thing that you think about whenever you're in your last moments of life? Usually not. We're thinking about our friends and our family and the moments and travel experiences that really lit our soul on fire. So if you're talking to somebody out there who needs to understand a little bit more about how to motivate themselves or what that next step is in life, what has made you truly wealthy, Josh?
What has made me truly wealthy is my family and friends.
Yeah.
And the wealth of community around me, because that is the bridge that can bring you happiness and joy. And that is a wealth that no money can get you.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that regardless how much money you have, you're not going to be wealthy in that aspect, because that thing doesn't have a price.
Right.
And just like you see that a lot in Jiu Jitsu, is that wealth of knowledge, right? And that wealth of knowledge can bring you that happiness that no money can buy.
Yeah.
And I don't know anybody who got a Jiu Jitsu belt that was like, oh, take this.
Yeah, it wasn't smiling, right?
No, that wasn't smiling. I've yet to see that. I have yet to see that.
Yeah.
It is every single time when somebody's getting a belt, whether it's a stripe or different color belt. And for me, that moment was getting a black belt. And I remember thinking, wow, what a journey, what like everything poured in. And there's just, it's an unbelievable feeling. And I want to share that with people. And I think that's really what the future holds for me, is that me able to share that with others and pass on into the next generation, more importantly. And I see that more clearly now with the new lens, because I'm a father, and because I'm a parent, and to see that I'm a son too, and I'm a brother, and, and now I'm an uncle, and, and you're like, you want to share more.
All the things,
right? And I think more of the important titles in life. I think that is the wealth that you have to recognize and seek after more.
Right.
Versus the wealth of financial needs and whatever it may be. I'm not saying that's not important, but at the end of the day, what's really important, and you want to be surrounded by the wealth that is important to you, which for me, it is family, it is that community, and it is having those important people around.
Yeah.
And and I am thankful and I'm grateful, and I am so honored to be able to at least kind of discuss and share those thoughts in my heart, because it is something I have, developed over the time, and I'm happy to be able to share that.
Yeah. Well, people need to hear it. I think people out there who are going up against obstacles that feel too tall to handle, you're a great example of somebody who's gone through a lot, and you're doing great. And I feel like it's just, you're not nearly finished with your growth. It's going to keep on. It's going to keep on going.
Still growing, still learning.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
But thanks for taking some time to be on the podcast with me, The Wealth of Self. We've got a great video project that we're going to knock out here. I'm working on a director's treatment for it, and it's going to happen. We just got to connect a couple dots. And for any listeners out there, I'll be excited to share that with them once that's done too. But
super excited.
I've had this vision for that story, and I feel like if we could do it the right way and really hit home on a few points, it could be really impactful.
Yeah.
So,
wealth of knowledge.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, wealth of self. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in on this episode of The Wealth of Self. As always, your viewership is immensely appreciated. If you want to take it a step further, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you are among the first people to know when new content is released onto our channel. Additionally, this is all about hearing voices. If you have any questions, anything that really resonated with you during this episode, leave a comment down below. I'm very eager to hear your voices and your thoughts. Until next time, thanks for watching The Wealth of Self.